Guys, welcome to my channel. There's a topic that I have been seeing being discussed, um, especially here on YouTube and on Twitter. The topic of cultural appropriation, and the biggest culprits that I'm seeing in this area happen to be Black Americans, or as they're called, African Americans. And there's a girl here on YouTube whose videos I've been watching. Her name is Sensei Aishitemasu. I think her actual name is Seren, but she goes by Sensei here on YouTube. I might link her videos down below so you can have a look for yourself what I'm talking about. She's the reason I was compelled to come on here and just kind of reply to some of her points that she's been making. She's made quite a number of points, and I might just come at a later date and speak on some of her other points. But for now, she's accusing Africans in America, that is African migrants and other Black migrants from the Caribbean, of appropriating African American culture or Black American culture. The culture that she speaks of, I believe, is the hip hop culture, which is actually happens to be a pseudo culture, not an actual culture. I think hip hop is actually a form of rebellion. It's a group of people from within society basically giving a finger to the status quo and to the rest of society, and just voicing out their frustrations. And so that is a form of rebellion, and it's become now a pseudo culture, which is large. It's consumed globally by all kinds of races. So what I find interesting is that she thinks that Africans are appropriating hip hop by listening and consuming it, and I guess living that hip hop life. I don't just living that hip hop life. I don't know exactly what hip hoppers do, but I think she's having a real problem with non-Black Americans or descendants of slavery, dabbling with this music. She has a huge problem with white people doing anything or embracing their culture. She has a problem with anybody. Recently there was a video of hers that was circulating and went viral because she was having a bit of a whinge about Bruno Mars and the fact that he's racially ambiguous. I think he's not Black. I think he's Filipino or Asian of some type, but he's not Black American, and because he can pass as one, and I guess he's racially ambiguous, and he's playing music that is typically or historically African American music. She had a big problem with that, and she, according to her, hip hop should only be consumed and appreciated by descendants of slavery. Okay, that's all well and good. I don't have a problem with her if that's what they wish, if that's what Black Americans want to do. We can denounce and stay away from hip hop, from this moment, starting from now. Okay, starting from today, we can advocate for Africans and non-white people, just every other race and group of people that don't happen to be descendants of the transatlantic slavery, to just stay away. I would love to see the repercussions of that within the Black American community itself, because Miss Sensei or Miss Seren, did you know that hip hop and rap music is consumed by majority white people? Or rather, the biggest consumers of rap and hip hop happen to be white people? Did you know that? This is obviously because of the population gap. You know, there are more white people than Black Americans. There are more of other groups of people than Black Americans because your community, your population is just smaller than the other communities. You're a minority. So if white people happen to enjoy hip hop, they're gonna listen to it and they're gonna buy it. And it's because of white people and Asians and other non-Black Americans, you know, including Africans, that this genre of music is now being globally consumed, and it has created and birthed some of the biggest millionaires and multimillionaires in the world. We would not have the Jay-Z's, the P. Diddy's, and the Dr. Dre's of today if it was not for the support of other cultures and other groups of people. So, okay, all right, we'll leave you to, stay with your music. You do your own thing. And you're just not going to experience the same success as you're experiencing with it. You can feel good now that hip hop is so exposed globally and it's being consumed globally. Instead of being proud of that and actually being happy that there's something that is authentically Black America that is being embraced globally, you want to say that that is a form of cultural appropriation. All right, how about this? Your name is Sensei Aishitemasu. Okay, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I know that sensei is a Japanese word for teacher or guru, spiritual guru. And I don't know what that last name means in Japanese, but if there's a Japanese person that happens to watch this video, please let us know what does Aishitemasu mean. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name, but it's very rich that someone with a Japanese name that is of cultural significance to the Japanese people has anything to discuss when it comes to this topic. Isn't it ironic? Because you are, in essence, really, you're also culturally appropriating Japanese culture. So why don't you start there? Why don't you start by changing your name to, some Black American name? I'm not going to mention any name, but, some stereotypically African American name. Why don't you change your name to that? Or why don't you stay with this Seren? Why are you appropriating Japanese culture? And second to that, why are Black Americans calling themselves African Americans? Why don't you start calling yourselves just Americans? Please drop the African from your name because there's nothing African about African Americans. Africans are Africans. And Africanness is a whole different thing. You don't just get to become African, okay? Just because your DNA has African ancestry does not make you African. Your DNA happens to have actually a variety of different races. There are European traces in your DNA. There are Native American traces in your DNA. And just in general, like, we're culturally different. We're very culturally different. And that's one thing that you and I can actually agree on, is that Africans and African Americans or Black Americans are very different people. We just happen to share similar features. Phenotypically, we're similar and similar skin color. But as you said it yourself, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Just because we may look alike a little bit, okay, does not mean that we're the same. We're very different, and that's fine. If we're happy with our Africanness, if it's about music, if culture is about music, okay, but, as far, anybody who is actually cultured will tell you that culture, music is the least, part of a culture. It's part of the culture, yes, but, there are many aspects to a culture. There are many things that actually make up what a culture is. And, we do have our own culture. We do have our own music, which is, our music is something that, we enjoy ourselves. If others enjoy it, we don't really care. We don't happen to have that type of visibility that Black Americans have. And that's fine. We're happy with whatever. We don't care what anybody thinks of our music. We have our own traditional music. We have the Afrobeat, which is taking Africa and parts of Europe by storm. We love our culture. And if music is only known to be a culture. Second to that, and by the way, sorry, I'm speaking, before I go there, speaking of music and hip hop itself, I find it ridiculous that anybody would actually would advocate for the consumption of music, especially within the Black American community. Because from what we're seeing, the statistics actually all happen to show that hip hop mentality is part of the reason for the dysfunction of the Black American community. It's because of hip hop and rap music that we're seeing all these unfavorable behavior, which has now become a huge part of the Black American way of life, and it's really ravaged the whole community. There's a lot of dysfunction. In their music, they're encouraging gang banging and violence and misogyny. There's a lot of they're encouraging young boys and essentially they're Black American men are behaving like boys, and the girls are behaving like women. Girls are promiscuous. They're encouraged to be promiscuous. Having children, from different fathers and out of wedlock and things like that. It's only in the Black American community that I'm seeing the encouragement and use of, people calling their girls and women the H word and the B word, and it's a normal part of their day-to-day lives. Like this, they don't see anything wrong with that. They don't see anything wrong with calling people, instead of saying a woman, calling a woman or a girl. You have to insult them because of this culture. Then it's a misogynistic culture. This hip hop, that's what it is. It encourages boys and men to disrespect women because the women are not respecting themselves to begin with anyway, and this is all encouraged in the music videos, in the songs, and the girls take pride in being hoes and bitchs. And so I just don't understand why Africans are trying to emulate this culture. Why would any sane African try to emulate this culture is what I'm wondering. We have our own cultures. We do, and very respectable cultures at that. Not to say that this is the only perfect culture that there is in the world, but we have a culture of respect. Okay, we have a culture where women are to respect themselves, men behave like men and treat women with respect, and women treat men with respect, vice versa. We treat elders with immense respect, and we generally just carry ourselves differently. We hold our heads high. That's the African, if there's not one monolithic African culture, obviously, but we share a lot of similarities because, that's what culture is. It's a mix and it's a mixture of a variety of cultures. There's not one original culture that just birthed itself or came from a vacuum. Culture essentially is a borrowing of different traditions and different ways of life and different things. We're global people. No man is an island. But if Black Americans wish to be an island and don't want people to appreciate their culture, that's fine. You can stay on your own. Nobody's gonna buy your music. Nobody's gonna invest in your community. And if you're gonna complain about anybody within the hip hop industry, why don't you start with the Jews that are actually controlling hip hop? All this money is going to the pockets of Jews. We're just we're a small part of what hip hop is. We just happen to consume it. But the people that are making big money from this are Jews. Why don't you go to them as well? Tell them to stop. Tell them not to invest in your community, in your boys and gals. So it's so funny to me. First, yeah. So stop calling yourself African Americans. That is a form of appropriation because Africanness is very unique. You don't just get to become African because your ancestors were taken from some part of Africa, God knows how many years ago. And second to that, You know, why don't you stop braiding your hair? Why do you do these African hairstyles, historically African hairstyles? I'm seeing Black Americans complaining about white people, you know, doing braiding their hair, doing cornrows, and all these hairstyles that are historically African American. Historically African, but you know, we Africans don't care because we find it as a form of flattery. But since you people happen to be the, you know, the global cultural appropriation police, we don't want you doing it now. We're deciding that we don't want you to braid your hair as well because you don't know the cultural significance of hair braiding. Okay, in African societies, you know, different hairstyles were actually used to express you know, oneself. You know, it was a way for people to, you know, show the world, you know, their status within society. Chiefs had their own hairstyles, community leaders had their own hairstyles, married women had their own hairstyles and forms of braiding. Girls, unmarried girls had their own hairstyles, boys had their own hairstyles, and things of that nature. So it's got cultural significance to Africans, you know. And you people do not understand what it means to Africans. You're using it as a hairstyle, so we're taking it back. Stop braiding your hair. Stop braiding your hair and do something else to your hair because you're appropriating African culture. You know, what I'm seeing is more African Americans actually are trying to identify with African culture than the other way around. Okay, you know, this whole, you know, these hoteps and a whole bunch of Black Americans think they actually come from Egypt, from ancient Egypt. You know, if you've heard we was Kangz, you know, things of that nature. No, you was not Kangz. You was not Kangz. There were no slaves taken from that part of Africa. All the slaves that came from the transatlantic slavery came from West Africa, from Western Africa. That's where you're from. And ancient Egypt is not in that part of Africa. If anything, I have more claim to ancient Egypt than anyone in the Western African region. Okay, so you was not Kangz. You happened, yes, you're descendants of Africans, that's for sure. But you know, you're not African, right? You're American. You know, you don't see any, you know, European Americans calling themselves European Americans or Irish American or you know, British American. You know, it's only Black Americans that are doing that. And I guess I can understand to a certain extent is, you know, they have to identify with a certain culture because they don't feel welcome in America. They've never felt like America accepts them as true Americans. But it's not up to America to accept you. It's up to you to accept America. You have to embrace America and actually claim it as your own. You know, no one can stop. It is as much yours as anybody's because you were taken there, you know, against your will. You didn't go there as migrants. Africans that are now migrating to Africa, who, in my opinion, should be, and those are the ones that are actually called African Americans, you know, because they're going there willfully, they're migrating willfully. No one is forcing them to go there. They're going for better opportunities. And this is where I think the problem comes. I think the problem with Black Americans, you know, their hatred for Africans is that, you know, Africans have gone to America and surpassed them. You know, they have left them in the hoods. They have left them in the ghettos, and they have made, you know, good lives for themselves, comfortable lives. They have become successful. You know, Asian Americans were once known as the model minority, and they're now being surpassed by Africans. Africans are now the model minority as far as success is concerned. They're doing very well for themselves, and they're leaving Black Americans behind. Before the migration of other blacks into America, you know, African Americans, you know, would complain that, you know, their reason for, lagging behind is due to racism. They blamed everything on racism and white people and the white man this, white supremacy this. And now that Africans have migrated there, people who are actually generally blacker, physically blacker, okay, are doing well. And now they have no excuse because Africans have proven that, you know, skin color has nothing to do with one's prosperity. As long as you're given an opportunity, as long as we're all provided with opportunities, we're all going to prosper. Anybody can prosper. I'm not saying racism does not exist. I'm sure people, even Africans are being discriminated against, but that does not stop anybody from going ahead and creating a good life for themselves. And now, this is becoming a threat to this victimhood mentality that African Americans, have had perpetually, since day one. It's shattering their worldview, because they cannot believe that, they cannot understand how someone can come from, such an undeveloped part of the world and come and make good use of the opportunities and do something for themselves, while they that have been there for centuries, they still can't figure out how to move about. So this is essentially a form of jealousy. That's all that I'm seeing. There's nothing genuine about their concern that, Africans are appropriating their culture by being involved in hip hop. That's a weak excuse. Very weak to say that, your hatred for Africans or your disdain for Africans is because they're appropriating your culture by, talking like you or sagging their pants like you or whatever it is. I'm sure that it's only a minority of Africans, by the way. I don't think many African parents would be happy to see their children, behaving in the manner in which African Americans behave, and that's just because it's the difference in the cultures. It's just so different. It's like literally the opposite of what African parents expect of their children. So this group that you complain about, they're a minority. And, fair enough, even if they're not a minority, still, that's not your reason. That's your reason for disliking them is not because they're in your music or whatever. You really are bothered by their success, because they're more successful. That bothers you. Instead of being mad at Africans and Caribbean blacks, why don't you stop listening to music, to hip hop, okay? Stop listening to rap, which teaches Black Americans that being educated is not cool, that reading is not cool, being square and being a lame, being smart is supposedly lame and square, that you have to be hood, all this manner of things. Why don't you start there? Why don't you start by actually, condemning hip hop? If I was in your shoes, honestly, I would be the first to be condemning hip hop, because it is really letting your community down. But since you want to be here and actually advocate for it, fine, keep it. We don't. Kids. I don't blame kids for for African kids to go to America and find themselves in a situation where they're being put in the hood and they're there with mingling with Black Americans, and the moment they claim or identify as Africans or from their countries of origin or their parents' origin, they get received with hostility. I've read and seen many accounts and heard from my own relatives who live in America that should they identify as African around Black Americans, they get a lot of backlash. So to avoid that, it takes a mature African to actually say, no, look, I'm African. I'm not Black American. I'm not African American. Apparently they hate it from what I've seen, not just, from I'm hearing the accounts of my relatives there. I've seen it here online. I've seen it on YouTube. If anyone here is on YouTube, you would have seen the story of Amy McClure, the mother of the McClure twins, who was attacked by African Americans for identifying as Nigerian instead of African American or Black American. She was attacked and lost subscribers. She was totally attacked, and there were people saying she does not appreciate her Blackness, or she doesn't like her Blackness. That's why she doesn't identify as Black American or yada yada. But clearly the lady is just saying that she's actually Nigerian. She's not African American. She's not Black American. She's not a descendant of slaves, of chattel slavery. She is a Nigerian woman. And what's wrong with that? Why do they get bothered by that? So because of such attitudes, young people are afraid, and they don't want to offend Black Americans. It seems that they're so sensitive and their egos are so fragile that they have to say these things to cuddle them, and there'll come a point whereby they'll realize, like, hang on, I don't have to be ashamed of my background. I don't have to deny my background just to make these people happy. That time will come, And in the meantime, tell your community, Sensei, please tell your community to stop forcing and arm twisting Africans into identifying as Black Americans or identifying as African Americans or whatever, as basically being one of you. It is you that actually insists on being one, We know our cultures. We know where we're from. We have countries of origin, which we've loved very much. And that's why you find Africans, no matter how many generations of those families have lived in America, they'll always claim their country of origin, An Sudanese will always be a Sudanese, no matter where they're born, no matter where their parents are born. They'll always consider themselves to be Sudanese because the culture is what we identify with first and foremost. So yeah, I'm just anything that I feel sorry for white people. Like, seriously, it's either white people are appropriating your culture or white people are doing this. You jump from white supremacy to patriarchy and to colorism, now to Africans. Africans taking your space. This perpetual victimhood mentality is really sad. I would hate to have such a mentality, to sleep at night. How do you sleep at night, feeling so little about yourself? Do you not have any pride? Do you not feel like a functioning member of society? Why must you feel like a victim all the time? Why must you, always seek sympathy? Because essentially what you're seeking is sympathy. You want someone to come and feel sorry for you and give you a hug. Okay, I'm sending you a hug. There you go. You're welcome.